Hello. I have a question for you as we begin our story time this morning in the service, and that is, I wonder if you have ever watched or participated in a game of baseball or softball. Now, in the games, a member of the team will bat and then will run and try to get to the different bases. And what is the final goal if you are playing? You want to get to home base. And home base is a place where you are safe, right? If you get there first, nobody can get you out. And I think of home base as being a little bit like in our lives, the ways in which we find spaces where we feel safe, where we feel like we belong. And for some of us, many of us, that is the home we live in. But I'm wondering today about what the difference is between home and just a place where you're living. So I want to invite you to indulge me a little bit, and if you would close your eyes and feel home around you, whatever that means for you. It might be the place you are right now. It might be somewhere else. It might not be a particular place at all, but what is the feeling of home? And sit with that feeling for a minute. What are the sounds that say home to you? What do you smell? What are you hearing? What does it feel like as it surrounds you and holds you? Now, I've been thinking a lot about home this week because 4 years ago, right now, my family was between homes. We were in the process of moving here to Tennessee. So exactly 4 years from tomorrow, if you are watching the service when it's first being shared, is when we arrived here in Tennessee. But we had left California a few days before. It took us a little while to get across the country because we were driving. So Eric and Evan and I left California. But before we did, we spent a little bit of time in the home that we were leaving, in the apartment where we were living in there. And in fact, that had been the only home that our kid, Evan, had ever lived in. It was, he came home from the hospital after being born, and we were in that home. And he spent his first 3 years there. And so it was a really kind of a special place for us as well, as the only home we had had as a whole family before. And so before we left, we took some time all together to visit each of the rooms and talk about some of our favorite memories there, what made it home for us, and to say goodbye. It was a little bit of a ritual of acknowledging how much that had been home for us and how much we were going to miss it, and a way of kind of closing that time and recognizing that we were going to be heading towards a new home. So then we got in the car and we drove and we drove and we drove. And then we arrived in Tennessee, right here to this house that I am in right now, sharing the story with you from. And we were home, except it didn't quite feel like home yet. Now, some of us might have lived in the same places for our whole lives. Many of us, I suspect, have moved before. But even if you haven't moved in the place you were living, I bet you have been somewhere new before. Maybe gone to a new school or even a new classroom. You've joined a new community. Or think about the first time you came to TVUC, if you're somebody who has been coming to the church when we were still meeting in our building. When you're there for the first time, it may not really feel like home. I knew this was my new house, this was my new home, this was where I was going to be living, but I wasn't familiar yet. It didn't have my things. It got a little better the next day when the movers arrived and all of our furniture came in and we started unwrapping it and putting them all in the places where we wanted them to be. And in some way, home is always where my family is, and so Eric and Evan were with me, and so there was a little bit of that. But something interesting and unexpected happened. One of the first evenings we were here, I went outside at night, and I heard something. For those of us here in Tennessee, what do we hear at night this time of year in the middle of the summer? We hear those wonderful night sounds of the crickets or katydids. Somebody knows better than I do exactly what they are. But suddenly, it felt different to me. Do you want to know why? My family is from Georgia. I lived in California for more than 20 years, and we've lived in a number of different places. But when I was a kid, we lived in Georgia near Atlanta, and my family was from there. So that was always that was always my home base, really, where my extended family was, and we went back to visit even when we weren't living there. And so that sound, those Tennessee night sounds, were very similar to the Georgia night sounds, and suddenly I had this connection in a really deep way with the home of my childhood, which I hadn't anticipated. And over time, it felt more and more like home in more ways, and especially after being here for a while and kind of building my life here. This is still home. This is home in a real way for me, even though there are ways in which I still miss California. But I'm wondering, what is it that makes something home for you? What does it make something home and not just the place where you are? So I'd like to invite you to indulge me again and think about, call forth again that feeling of home for you. But imagine this time that something's off. Something's not quite right. It's like when you get some new clothes, or maybe have been growing some, and you thought when you put the clothes on that they were a good fit, but if you wear them throughout the day after a while, it gets a little uncomfortable. Maybe it's a little too tight in one spot. It doesn't quite fit right. It might be harder in some ways for something to be almost right than to know that it's just not your place, right? That it's not your home. Something that's so close that feels almost right. I wonder if there are ways in which our community is almost home for some of us, and ways in which we could be attuned to making our spaces be truly not just welcoming, because I think welcoming, our focus on welcoming is a really good one, but also sort of implies that people are coming to us as guests, as opposed to coming to a place that is theirs as much as it is ours. And so I'd like to invite you this week to think about, what is it that makes something home for you? What is it that makes the place you're living home? What is it that makes your communities feel like home? And how can we work together to build that home into an even wider and wider and wider circle? Thank you so much for sharing this time with me this morning.